obviously talking about the horrific nature and the particulars of what's happening, but the question is, would it widen and how quickly? Because one of the things of note is Hamas is a terror army, and we saw their capabilities that surprised Israel yesterday. But Hezbollah in the north is a much more sophisticated, battle-hardened fighting force. And so should a ground incursion happen in Gaza, we saw buildings leveled yesterday from fighter jets by the Israelis. If a ground incursion happens there, Hezbollah has said they will get involved in the north, and these rocket attacks on territory in the north could be an indication that that might be happening.
Yeah, and there's the no small matter of Israeli hostages, and how's that going to play out? You know, as you know, Pete, Hamas uses hostages in nefarious ways to shield their own. So the negotiations underway, the calculations underway by Netanyahu to get those hostages back, and how to unleash a retaliatory strike in an area where you've got Israeli hostages, children, one mother and her two children, I read, ages 2 and 4, taken as Israeli hostages.
Just horrific, savage imagery coming from southern Israel. The retaliatory response from Israel is inevitable. It is certain. The ability to contain this, whatever this may be, this war, to Israel, to Gaza, to the West Bank, even to Hezbollah and Lebanon, is really what is the great question. That news that there is 1 or 2 Israelis and 1 Egyptian shot is the fulfillment of something we spoke about yesterday, which is the call for everyone to mobilize. That's what Hamas has asked for. And there have been some instances of that, by the way, they have seen in places like Jerusalem or Tel Aviv. There has been some mobilization of radicals. So the question is not just what is Israel's response going to be, but what is the response of the greater region? Yes. What is the response from Hezbollah? What is the response from Syria? What is the response from Iraq? What is the response of Saudi Arabia? Because that is the big one when you were standing on the doorstep of peace with Israel and Saudi Arabia.
You're exactly right, because when you look at the history of the conflicts in the region, and Will, in a little bit, we're going to go off the wall about this. When you look at the Arab-Israeli war in 1948, the Six-Day War in 67, the Yom Kippur War in 73, what the Palestinians counted on was the Arab world rallying to their side. And a lot of times it was rhetorically, but it was also, Jordan and Egypt sent tanks and fighter planes to try to eliminate the state of Israel. In this case, those more conventional threats from nation states has eroded. And what Iran is so scared of is the idea that a Saudi Arabia and others would make peace with Israel, so that when all these terrorist organizations are saber rattling or actually committing acts of terrorism, they don't have the universal chorus of Arab nations saying, we're behind you, giving them cover.
So what they hope for, from what I understand, Pete, what they hope for is a bunch of dead bodies now in Gaza to put Saudi Arabia into a position where they cannot sign a peace deal with Israel. This was a purposeful, chaotic terrorist attack on the part of Iran to scuttle, as we heard earlier in the hour from Dr. Kanta Ahmed, to scuttle that deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel. So the question is, what does Israel's response to this do to the wider Arab world?
And what an enormous victory that would be to have a normalization of relations with Saudi Arabia. To put it into context, under President Trump, you had the Abraham Accords, and you had deals with Bahrain, you had deals with Morocco, UAE. So you already see the Muslim world kind of migrating and saying, yes, we will work with Israel. Now you bring Saudi Arabia in, a huge, enormous country. And our last guest, Dr. Ahmed, in one of her op-eds said, that changes the whole construct of the Middle East. It used to be Iran counts on Muslim versus Jew, but you bring Saudi Arabia, normalize relations with Iran. All of a sudden, Muslim versus Jew might not any longer be the dynamic. We need the region versus Iran, and Iran doesn't want that.
And how does all of that change the calibration of Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel's response?
Yes.
Because you have the tactical, the operational, and the strategic levels of what you do. Tactically and operationally, the playbook for Israel is overwhelming destruction of your enemy, sending a signal of strength that this will not be tolerated. On the other end, to your point about Saudi Arabia, it's such a challenge, though, because it's been 50 years since Israel's declared this kind of war, seen this kind of attack. You're hearing in Israeli media, hey, this is our 9/11. Look at what America did after our 9/11. And the lengths we went to destroy our enemies. If that's the case, then the whole relationship with Saudi Arabia becomes secondary here. And the response becomes a response to the Israeli electorate and citizens to say, we're going to go all in no matter what.
And it seems fairly impossible, in my amateur estimation, which I would defer to anyone of expertise on this, it seems fairly impossible to surgically root out Hamas in Gaza, which means there's going to be a lot of civilian casualties. And Bibi Netanyahu has already warned, get out of Gaza.
Yes.
If you are a civilian, if you are an innocent, get out of Gaza. And he has said it's going to be turned to rubble.
And historically, what we have seen on the part of the media, on a part of the world, really, in many cases, is there's initially a rush to say, this is horrific, what is being done to Israel, this is terrorism. And then shortly thereafter, to your point, Israel's warned, get out of the way, we're going to retaliate. But when that body count starts racking up, all of a sudden, watch for that heel turn by the liberal media to then blame Israel. You already see Ilhan Omar saying she wants a ceasefire. Okay, 9/11 happens in this country. You know, thousands of Americans dead. We went and got the Taliban. We went and got Osama bin Laden. She wants a ceasefire? No, Israel has to retaliate.
Yeah, that is the reflexive instinct of the left. I mean, I heard the same thing as on my college campus after 9/11. You know, peace, peace. And I can still see the smoke from the World Trade Center and say, what are you talking about? Will, to your point, the one place you can count on there being civilians and or fighters, or hostages, is in hospitals and schools in the Gaza Strip. I mean, Human Shields is their textbook. And this is sort of like what we attempt to do with ground operations and our own combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. You attempt to tell the local population to leave. But in Gaza, I mean, that's 2 million people in a tiny strip of land without an opportunity to go a lot of other places. So if you're going to flatten it, if you're going to crush Hamas, people are going to be killed. And you have to set that expectation.
Well, that's a analysis this morning, but earlier in the show, we spoke to the human impact when we talked to Lizzie Savetsky, who is an American, also an Israeli activist. She lives in New York City, but she's visiting Israel with her children and her husband, and this is how they experienced the tragedy yesterday.
We are here to celebrate Simchas Torah, which is, Simcha means happy. A celebration of happiness and joy and our devotion to our Torah and our homeland. And then we were rudely awakened yesterday morning by the siren going off. My older daughter came into the room and she said, I hear sirens. Somebody said there's a bomb drill. And I said, Stella, there's no bomb drills in Israel. That's real. It was actually one of the scariest experiences of my life. Because, you're freaking out yourself and you're trying to keep your child calm. My kids are very aware of what's happening, and we've just had conversations about how we're safe in the hotel, how we're not leaving the hotel, and why we're staying put.
I saw a video of, a lot, we've talked about this, of the images, the videos that you see on social media are heartbreaking and tragic. And I saw one where 2 children were on the ground with their parents, and the little boy was crying because his sister had just been killed as they were waiting to see if they would become hostages as they grieved the loss of their sister. This is the reality. Women being drugged through the streets by their hair. That is Hamas. They are terrorists.
The other reality that hits you every time you're in Israel is the existential nature of daily life. Like, it looks normal. It feels normal at a lot of levels, but around every corner is a soldier with a rifle or a policeman who's seen things before. And so it flips at any moment. And it's totally different than living in your neighborhood in the United States, where, these days in some inner cities, we're seeing a different reality, but for the most part.
No doubt about it. Well, meanwhile, President Biden is promising unwavering support for Israel, at least for now, while his administration faces backlash over the $6 billion in frozen Iran funds released last month.
Let's turn now to Lucas Tomlinson, who is live from the White House. Hey, Lucas.
Guys, officials are calling this the largest terrorist attack on Israel in its 75-year history. President Biden, speaking here at the White House yesterday, pledged his full support.
The United States stands with the people of Israel in the face of these terrorist assaults. Israel has the right to defend itself and its people. Full stop. There's never justification for terrorist attacks. And my administration's support for Israel's security is rock solid and unwavering.
Former President Donald Trump, speaking in Iowa yesterday, assailed the Biden administration for adding $6 billion in that recent prisoner swap with Iran to free those American hostages.
In addition to that, we agreed to free up $6 billion. And that is an absolute disaster. And I would not be at all surprised if part of that tremendous wealth that they just accumulated went into all of a sudden watching this level of aggression.
Now, another GOP candidate, Senator Tim Scott, joined in the criticism.
I will say without any question, you look back at the actions of the Joe Biden administration, $6 billion for hostages, realizing that money is fungible. That is devastation. It makes them complicit with these attacks.
Now, some think this tweet by Iran's supreme leader is proof Iran is behind the orders for Hamas to launch its deadly attacks on Israel yesterday. Iran does not want to see Saudi Arabia and Israel recognize each other for the first time in history, Kayleigh, as you mentioned earlier. And in recent interviews with Bret Baier, the leaders of both countries sounded like they were close. Here's Iran's supreme leader in that tweet saying, quote, "The usurper regime is coming to an end. Today, the Palestinian youth and the anti-oppression, anti-occupation movement in Palestine is more energetic, more alive, and more prepared than ever during the past 70 or 80 years. God willing, the movement will achieve its goals." Now, the Biden administration is pushing back, denying that any of the $6 billion in recently unfrozen assets was used to finance those Hamas attacks on Israel. Here's a Treasury official saying, quote, "These restricted funds cannot go to Iran. It can only be used for future humanitarian-related purposes. Any suggestion to the contrary is false and misleading." Now, former Defense Secretary Mark Esper and Senator Lindsey Graham are calling this massive attack on Israel yesterday a massive intelligence failure, guys.
All right, thank you, Lucas. Just absolutely stunning video as well yesterday from Iran. Did you see the videos from the floor of their
Yes.
legislature? Which is a figurehead legislature largely anyway, but yelling death to Israel and death to America.
Yes, and not only that, setting off fireworks on Iran state media. They played the clips of their parliament doing that. So if you have any idea where Iran stands, people are like, was Iran behind this or not? Of course they were. This is their proxy. They were excited about it. You had a senior advisor, just to quote him briefly, saying this, death to Israel. That was the parliament. We congratulate the Palestinian advisors. That's a senior advisor to the Iranian government.
And you see our administration working very hard to say, oh, the $6 billion, it's not in their bank account yet. There may be technicalities about that. As you both pointed out, it's all fungible. But you also had the Obama administration giving away cash to the Iranians multiple times. And then you've got the easing of sanctions and the lightening of the restrictions against Iran under the Biden administration. So they want to fight over the particulars of $6 billion and whether it's in a Qatari bank account or not, or whether they can use it for humanitarian aid. The signals have been sent. And that's a part of what Adam Bowler, he was one of the negotiators of the Abraham Accords. He talked about the results of our treatment of Iran. Watch.
The American people should understand that this is not border towns that are being attacked. This is central Israel. So that is the equivalent of New York being attacked. And I would liken this a little bit to Israel's 9/11. So you'd reflect on this. This is a big attack. This is men, women, and children being pulled out of cars, taken hostage. So this is a huge deal. So that's first and foremost. The second thing I'd say is this doesn't happen if Iran isn't behind it, pushing it right now. And that's what you're seeing. The Abraham Accords, when we worked on them and signed them, formed protection against that. And we were very serious about Iran and what was let through from a financial perspective and what would happen if there was any disruption. And so that protected against it. I think a lot of the timing that you're seeing right now has to do with two things. One is relaxed sanctions on Iran, so they built up more of a financial war chest. And number two, Saudi Arabia has indicated that they're interested in normalizing with Israel. This is Iran's opportunity to try to disrupt Saudi Arabia from normalizing with Israel, and we can't let that happen.
You know, that's Adam Bowler. I worked with Adam. He, Avi Berkowitz, Jared Kushner, Robert O'Brien, all key in getting those peace accords in the Middle East. And the key point that he just said there is Iran. How did you get peace accords with these countries? By crystallizing the true enemy here for the region, and that is Iran. Not just a threat to Israel, but a threat to the broader region at large. And that pushed these peace deals through.
Kayleigh, you brought it up earlier. We talked about the response here back home in America. We talked about the response from the squad. Pete, you brought up the comparison to some of your college classmates who call for peace in the wake of 9/11 while there's still smoke coming up from downtown Manhattan. So here's an example of what Kayleigh was talking about. This is Ilhan Omar, Congresswoman from Minnesota and member of the Squad. I condemn the horrific acts we are seeing unfold today in Israel against children, women, the elderly, and the unarmed people who are being slaughtered and taken hostage by Hamas. Such senseless violence will only repeat the back and forth cycle we've seen, which we cannot allow to continue. We need to call for a de-escalation and ceasefire. I will keep advocating for peace and justice throughout the Middle East.
The old ceasefire when only one side's taken a shot so far.
Right.
I mean, basically, and it's to be expected. Here's her fellow Squad member, Will, the socialist from the Bronx, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, saying this. Today is devastating for all those seeking a lasting peace and respect for human rights. I condemn Hamas attack in the strongest possible terms. No child and family should ever endure this kind of violence and fear. And this violence will not solve the ongoing oppression and occupation in the region. An immediate ceasefire and de-escalation is urgently needed to save lives.
And keep in mind, these statements come not in a vacuum. They come from individuals, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, who you point out we've yet to hear from, who have anti-Semitism in their past, widespread, who have said horrific, horrific things. And yet they want a ceasefire. Unsurprising coming from this group.
Still ahead, the threat to international security as Iran-backed Hamas attack on Israel is deemed an intel failure. Is this part of a broader Iranian strategy?
Former U.S. Ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, shares his warning live from Jerusalem next.
Experts are flabbergasted over how Hamas terrorists pulled off such a coordinated, expansive, and detailed sneak attack without Israel's elite networks finding out in advance. And a big question is, what does that mean for the safety of its allies, namely the United States as well? Former U.S. Ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, joins us now from Jerusalem. David, thank you for joining us. First of all, how are you? Give our viewers a sense of the environment in Jerusalem from your perspective.
Well, I'm fine. I've been through this, unfortunately, many times before. I'm sitting in my home with a bunch of grandchildren who are unfortunately experiencing this for the first time. And I feel for them because, we're running in and out of shelters and we have to explain to them what's happening. They don't understand why there are people that want to kill Jews. And it's an exposure to an ugly world that I wish I didn't have to share with them. But physically, I think we're fine. People down south, much less so.
David, it was a surprise to the world, but to the IDF as well. What's the conversation inside Israel surrounding the capabilities of Israeli intelligence, defense forces? Is it shaken right now?
No, it's shaken to the core. This is not consistent at all with Israel's perception of itself. The Israeli intelligence services, as you know, are the best in the world. And this was not a particularly sophisticated attack. This was a bunch of terrorists marching across the border, blowing up a fence. There's a buffer zone between, Gaza and that border. They should have been intercepted before they ever got to the border. They blew up the fence. They marched through 22 towns, took over an army base for 10 hours. They killed a bunch of soldiers in their sleep. They proceeded, obviously, to commit atrocities, the likes of which I don't think we've seen since the Holocaust. So this has shaken the country to its core. And I think it's also taught everyone here, and it should teach everyone throughout the world, an important lesson, which is, intelligence is incredibly important. Technology is incredibly important. But you know what? There's something about, blocking and tackling that wins football games and keeps people safe. And the failure to intercept this march across the border tells me that people in Israel, the elite in Israel, and I think it may be true in America as well, they're focusing on shooting missiles out of the air at 500 miles an hour. They're focusing on the most sophisticated technologies that you need to, have a PhD in physics to understand. That's all very important. But look what brought Israel to its knees here. It wasn't any great technology. It wasn't a missile. It was just a simple ability to, but presumably to maybe hack into a camera system or hack into an early warning system for which there should be numerous redundancies. And it's telling, I think, people here, and I think it should tell people all around the world, it's not just about, technologies and physics and algorithms. It's also about, basically keeping your borders safe. And that's the lesson that I think America can gain from as well. You got to know who's in your country. You got to know what's on your border, and you got to be able to protect your border from bad people. And unfortunately, Israel learned maybe the most painful lesson in its 75-year history yesterday about how important it is to have basic security redundancies that keep people safe, and it's a colossal failure. This is, people call it, Israel's 9/11. I think it's, more like Israel's Pearl Harbor, because, the difference between 9/11 and Pearl Harbor is, in Pearl Harbor we knew exactly who the enemy was, and we knew we were hostile with them. 9/11, it took some time to figure out who the enemy was, to figure out where it came from. This, we knew in advance exactly who the enemy was and that they were trying to kill us, and we still failed to stop it from happening. So it's a crushing blow to Israel. I think, and I hope, and I pray that this lesson will now be internalized within Israel, and I hope among Israel's allies around the world, including my country, America, to get back to basics. You can't win a football game with a quarterback and a wide receiver. You need a guard, you need a tackle, you need a running back. Yeah, you need the whole package, and even the old-fashioned security devices and practices are so important.
One of the best breakdowns I've heard so far, David Friedman. Thank you so much. God bless. Please keep us posted.
You too, Pete. Good. God bless you.
Good to see you. All right, stay with us.
Fox News alert this morning: Israel is reeling as Hamas murders hundreds while abducting innocent women, children, and soldiers right off the streets. Our next guest witnessed the attacks firsthand, and today will be attending the funeral of a close friend's son, an IDF soldier murdered while defending his country. Israeli tour guide Robbie Berman joins us live. Robbie, I'm so sorry for the loss of your friend's son. How's he doing today?
The funeral, we haven't even had the funeral yet, so I don't know. I've not been in touch with them. And another friend in Efrat, his son was kidnapped. One of the soldiers was kidnapped. So It's really a very sad day for the whole country. Yeah.
Wow. And no updates yet on the location of your other friend whose son was kidnapped?
No. But I live in Tel Aviv, in the heart of Tel Aviv. And right now, as we're talking, I have a perfect view of Ichilov Hospital. And there are military helicopters landing every few minutes, unloading the wounded and then going back out to pick them up again. So this is an ongoing thing. The terrorists have not been cleaned outside of Israel. They're still terrorists in Israel. This is a huge, not just an intelligence failure, it's a huge military and political failure, but more military. How is it possible that they were managed to kill all the people, all the outlook posts, kill the soldiers, kill them in their sleep? And there's still, as we speak now, just a few hours ago, a woman said that she received a phone call from her niece, who's 8 years old, and said she's hiding inside her kibbutz. They have killed mommy and daddy. She's hiding with her 4-year-old brother underneath the bed. They've been there for hours. No one's coming to get them. I mean, this is an ongoing failure, an ongoing tragedy. Hundreds of people have been killed. Over 100 people have been kidnapped and brought into Israel. And these are old women, young children, young people going to the music fair. This is a tragedy. I think David Friedman was correct that this is kind of a Pearl Harbor. I feel so bad for the innocent Palestinian women and children in Gaza, but there's going to be a lot of people who are going to die. This is a war. This is war. This is a full-time war. And this was done on the anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, and it exactly was like Yom Kippur. It was a bigger scale because at least in Yom Kippur War, it was the soldiers that bore the blunt, but here it was civilians that bore the blunt, and hundreds of Israelis have been killed. It's unbelievable. It's an act of war, and things are not going to be good here in this country for many, many months to come. And I will not be surprised that if in 6 months there's a committee of an inquiry, and the prime minister and the defense minister and the head of the chief of staff and the head of the Shabak, Ronen Bar, all have to resign, because it's a failure of massive proportions: intelligence, military, and political.
Well, Robbie, that just breaks my heart. You just mentioned a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old hiding
under a bed, looking at their parents on the floor, swimming in their own blood, saying they're not moving, they're dead. What do we do? Where are the police? People have been calling the police, and the police don't pick up the phone. You know why? Because the police in that area were attacked and they were killed. 30 policemen in one station were killed. This is an act of war of a scale that we haven't seen. In the Lebanon war that Israel had in 1983, For the whole 6 months war, only 670 soldiers, Israeli soldiers, died. We've had over 350 people die on the first day.
Wow.
This is huge.
You know, Robbie, stay safe. A former colleague of mine in the Trump administration is in Tel Aviv, too. And he mentioned having to go up and down with his 6-year-old daughter between a bomb shelter and his residence. Absolutely tragic.
You know, it's such a tragedy because people are dying. More people are going to die. We're spending trillions of dollars on nonsense. It's not going to get us closer to peace. It's not going to get Hamas closer to what they want. The GDP plummets. I'm a tour guide. I've given back last night probably about $6,000 in deposits. People are canceling left and right. This whole thing is just awful for everybody.
Robbie,
and the people that died, innocent people have died. Terrible.
My heart is with Israel right now. We will be praying for you as you attend that funeral today. Thank you very much, Robbie Berman.
Thank you. Thank you.
So let's go off the wall to break down the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflicts and how this one stacks up against others. Now, if you really want to start at the beginning, better open your Bible. Because ultimately this land has been disputed all the way back to then. I mean, you go to Hebron today, the tomb of the patriarchs, Abraham and Isaac, where God said, this is the land will be for you and your descendants. But we'll fast forward about 2,000 years or more than 2,000 years to the fall of the Ottoman Empire.
And we should say at the outset, this is an extremely complex history with disputed facts, and we approach this with a great amount of humility, but hope to give you a little bit of context to understand the greater scope of history. You pointed out, Pete, the Ottoman Empire controlled this region for centuries, quite honestly, and it began its fall. You can see it controlled everything across North Africa, through Turkey, and up into Eastern Europe, Southeastern Europe. And it began its collapse in the early 1900s. Ultimately, it was a participant in World War I alongside Germany and Italy, but its collapse begins to destabilize the region.
No doubt. So the losers of World War I ultimately get carved up, and through that carve up, you get the British Mandate, which that period of time, you can kind of liken it to the Romans and the Jews, 2,000 years before that. There's a foreign occupier. Some people looked kindly, certain Jews did on the British Mandate, but ultimately it became very, very controversial. It was declared with the Balfour Declaration.
That's right. So at the end of World War I, the League of Nations grants Britain basically control over the region. And that begins, as you point out, the carve up, the ultimate process of the carve up of the region into essentially nation states. What was a tribal region of people of varying religions and interests became something more resembling the modern map of nation states.
And Jews had lived all throughout Europe and had lived peacefully throughout Europe for quite some time. Then you saw the rise of anti-Semitism, real anti-Semitism directed at Jews, most dramatically, obviously, in Germany and Nazi Germany. World War II happens. You have the Holocaust. And for a period of 25 years, a lot of Jews there's a new Zionist movement forming around Jerusalem, return to our homeland. And so you see millions and millions of Jews returning to Israel. And that's when the conversation starts about a Jewish state.
And we don't want to take for granted, also we don't want to be patronizing, but don't take for granted that everyone understands all of the words, all the terms, all the geography, Gaza, the West Bank. So let's focus in on that, zoom our map in just on Israel. We've talked about these areas of Israel off and on, not just for the last couple of days, but for weeks and months and years. Pete has done a great job of highlighting what's happened here in the last couple of days. There are two Palestinian areas of Israel, largely the West Bank, which I believe, Pete, a good geographic comparison to this is Delaware, and the Gaza Strip, where we're focused right now, where most of this, not just rockets, but ground forces, chaotic terrorist ground forces poured out of Gaza.
And of course, this borders with Egypt. The Hamas used to be an affiliate of the Muslim Brotherhood, which emanated out of Egypt. They broke from them because they wanted to seek effectively the destruction of the state of Israel. The West Bank, it's also known as Judea and Samaria. So much of Israel is words and semantics and how it's framed. It's a place where a lot of sites that Christians and Jews would relate to are located. Bethlehem is in the West Bank. Jericho, if you know the walls of Jericho. The baptismal site of Jesus on the Jordan River in the West Bank as well.
Yeah, you can see the rough geographic approximations of the size of Gaza, which has been described as one of the most densely populated areas on Earth, and then the West Bank. And you go ahead, Pete.
It's super complicated. There's an Area A, Area B, Area C. Certain areas are controlled by the Israeli military. but there's the Palestinian Authority is in control of governance, and then there are some where the Israelis are in charge of governance. I mean, you cross different checkpoints all throughout the West Bank.
And you heard me reference it just a moment ago. Comparison of the West Bank roughly to the size of Delaware. Comparison of the entire state of Israel to the state of New Jersey here when we're talking about the geographic expanse. Let's go to a timeline again now. This is extremely complicated. We'll do our best to share with you what's happened over the past 80 years or so in the formation of Israel and the corresponding wars and fights.
And you can't minimize the impact of World War II, the recognition of the devastation of the Holocaust that happened there, and the opportunity for Jews to form a homeland. So there was, in 1947, the UN voted to divide that area into separate Jewish and Arab states. But of course, Arab countries didn't want Jews in the Middle East, and so there was a lot of consternation about that.
Yeah, I mean, it immediately ignites a war. But in 1948, the state of Israel is officially established at the wake of that war, a war in which Israel wins. Agreements are signed with Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon to reach formal peace treaties. And that, though, has always been tenuous and temporary.
America recognized Israel within 11 minutes of their declaration, and then they were almost immediately attacked by countries on all sides. A lot of people thought the Jewish state might not exist after that. They fought back and won, and therefore had a chance. This was the big one. The Six-Day War in 1967 reshuffled the whole deck because ultimately Israel, Bibi Netanyahu and his brother, I mean, they remember going onto the Temple Mount. I mean, the West Bank was recaptured. East Jerusalem was recaptured. The Golan Heights up here were taken, which were very strategically significant. And the Gaza Strip was taken by Israel as well. So the modern state of Israel.
Xin chào các bạn. Chào mừng các bạn đến với kênh Đức Tương Channel. Hôm nay mình sẽ hướng dẫn các bạn tô màu cho bức tranh Valiant. Bây giờ mình và các bạn cùng nhau tô màu cho bức tranh này nhé. Bây giờ chúng ta sẽ cùng nhau tô màu bông hoa leo này nha. Những màu cần chuẩn bị mình nghĩ sẽ là màu đỏ và màu xanh. Đỏ và xanh nó sẽ là hai màu chủ đạo của để mình tô màu bông hoa lên. Bắt đầu thôi các bạn. Đỏ mình sẽ sử dụng màu đỏ tươi. Mình sẽ tô từ trên ngọn xuống trước. Mình sẽ phải hết sức chú ý phân biệt được đâu là nụ hoa, đâu là cánh hoa. Vì nụ hoa và cánh hoa của cây lơ này rất là giống nhau. Tại sao phải là hoa rung ơn mà lay ơn nhỉ các bạn? Mình đố bạn biết tại sao đấy. Tại sao không phải là rung ơn mà là lay ơn? Rung với lay thì nó đồng nghĩa với nhau mà. Mình sẽ tô từ trái qua phải nhé. Bổ sung thêm là phần nhị hoa mình sẽ tô màu vàng. Màu nhạt. Tiếp tục mình sẽ tô mình nhựa hoa màu vàng nhạt. Sức chú ý. Chúng ta đã hoàn thành xong phần tô màu cho bức tranh Hoa Lây ơn. Nếu cảm thấy thích video, các bạn hãy like, share và đăng ký kênh để giúp mình có động lực ra thêm nhiều video nữa nhé.